Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the 2017 Global Education Conference. We are closing in on the end of day 2, and we're especially delighted to have David Ross with us. He's the CEO of Partnership for 21st Century Learning. David, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Thanks, Steve.
And thank you all for being here. As well, we thank our sponsors and supporters, in particular VIF, International Education, Google for Education, TES, Iron USA, and some of you are playing the Gamify game that Lucia set up with Chrome Warrior, but we appreciate that they've provided that, and they put a lot of work into this fun activity and opportunity for people to get a certificate of attendance. There are other good sponsors. We encourage you to look at our sponsor and partner page and do let them know that you appreciate their making this available for free. For those of you who are participating live, this is your chance to let us know where you are in the world. So look to the left of the map. You're looking for the star icon, the second one down. Click on it twice and then click on the map. You can also put a note in the chat. Let us know your location, the time, the temperature, if you're watching the big moon tonight, anything that you think would be fun for us to know. I looked at it, it didn't look that big to me. Okay, well, we look North America-centric tonight. There must be somebody, oh, no, wait, there's somebody in, looks like Europe there, close to the Middle East. Turkey, wonderful. Okay, we're going to move this slide forward and let David start to present, but please keep letting us know in the chat where you're coming in from. And then if you have questions during the presentation, we'll make note of them and have them ready for David when he's done. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Steve. Before I get started, I want to give a shout out to Steve and Lucy. We were chatting before the session began, and I want to applaud their attention to detail and the hard work they've done. I had run a global education conference before, and that was in one time zone in one location. So the thought of doing this on a global scale over a course of several days is daunting, and they deserve our applause, even if they can't hear it. I want to thank you folks for joining us tonight. Tonight for me, I'm working in Washington, D.C., where we are headquartered. I normally live in California. I know we've got folks from, it's very late at night or very early in the morning, or some of you are enjoying supper, so thanks for sharing your time. What we're going to talk about tonight is something near and dear to my heart, and I've shortened the title, and we call it 6 Strategies for Supporting Global Education, and we're going to explore what that particularly means. But the first thing I'd like your help on, and you can use the chat section of the window, or you can use the hashtag for the conference, but I'd like you to give us some ideas so that we can all see what you're thinking. And it says list 4 to 5 skills you as an adult learner, if you're an adult, or if you're a student, you as a student. What do you need to be successful in college, career, and life? And the focus is on skills, not on knowledge. So I'll be watching the chat window, but if you can type in some of the things that you think are essential skills to be successful in college, career, and life. I already saw one from Tracy. The first word that came up with is collaborate, and that's one of my favorite skills. I work in a highly successful team. Perseverance, excellent. Let's see what creativity, that's one of our 4 C's. Love that. Critical thinking, self-learning, they're coming in fast. Willingness to learn, communication, problem solving. Let's get a few more. Multilingual, we're going to talk about that in a moment. I'm glad somebody had that in. Self-direction, interdependence, deal with change, empathy, fight. Oh my goodness, what a list. Willingness to pivot, that's one of my favorite words from the high-tech sector. So we'll spend a few more choices, and then we're going to move on, and we're going to explore that because I think you're going to find that there are a whole lot of people who agree with us. Ability to self-assess, reflection, agency, this is good stuff. Well, I'm going to keep talking, and we'll advance the slides, but don't stop there, and we're going to return to this list because I want to use it as sort of a baseline for the conversation. The next slide you're seeing now is a graphic representation. P21, my organization, and I'll talk about that more in a moment, is at the center of that. But if you see that visual, there are three large elements that encircle the visual of our logo. The first one is policy. As I mentioned, we're based in Washington, D.C. We work with 20 U.S. states on educational policy, and we work very closely with the United States Department of Education. I meet with them once a month to talk about policy. So P21 focuses on policy. The next thing you'll see is the big gold slice on the bottom, and that's business. Now, when you see another slide from us in a moment, you're going to notice who are the organizations we partner with. You'll notice the names of some very large companies, but some very small nonprofits. And the final piece is practice, and we're going to talk about that more in a moment, is P21 has a set of 75 exemplar schools. And these are K-12 schools for now, but we're broadening our spectrum. So we're actually looking for exemplars that are in the beyond school space, and this could be at summer camp or after school programs or museum learning spaces or parks. We're looking for exemplars for that, and I'll talk about our exemplars more in a moment. But I want you to focus on the three elements of that graphic. Is P21 sits at the middle of those three forces of nature, forces of education, and tries to integrate and convene and foment conversation and exchange ideas. And so the people from the business and nonprofit sector who help fund us interact with policy people at the state and at the national level. And they also interact with the K-12 practitioners who are putting their policies into practice. And P21 tries to facilitate the conversations and get feedback from it, because the businesses want to know what the teachers are doing, the policymakers want to know what business cares about. Everybody's interacting, and we try to sit. Oh, I like the idea that it's a golden ratio. I'm going to use that in the next time I do a presentation. Thanks for that feedback. Now, the next slide is, I have a sense of humor. Some people think it's good. Some people don't think it's so good, but I think it's amusing. This is my name slide, and I want to talk a little bit about what brought me to this place in this location in the education universe. I always joke that I'm a millennial trapped in an old man's body. And by that I mean I changed jobs at 5 or 6 year intervals. I started out my career as a newspaper reporter, then editor in Los Angeles. I switched careers and became a classroom teacher. I taught in a 6th grade classroom in Los Angeles, and for lack of a better description, it was a game school. Very, very challenged for a number of different reasons. Then my wife and I moved to Northern California, where her family's from, and she's an immigrant from the Philippines, by the way. So multiculturalism is dear to my heart. And I taught at the New Technology High School in Napa, California, which is a demonstration site for the U.S. Department of Education. And I taught there for 4 years, and I became an aficionado of project-based learning. More on that later. I left there, and after starting my own business, I moved, and some of you may be familiar with the Buck Institute for Education, which is the global leader in project-based learning. I worked there for 7 years as the senior director and helped build that organization. Then, lucky for me, I joined the Partnership for 21st Century Learning in May, and a few weeks ago, I've got 2 weeks under my belt, I was appointed the new CEO. P21 is a 14-year-old nonprofit, and as that first diagram demonstrated, we sit at the intersection of business, practice, and policy. And you'll notice on the right-hand side of the screen that I've created like a nav bar. That's the way I do slides. The first is our logo in the URL for our website, and on the bottom of it is a QR code for a Pinterest board. We have created a lot of content over the last 14 years, And that Pinterest board contains everything we've ever done about global education, U.S. education, workforce readiness, and then we started to put content from other friends and partners like OECD and UNESCO and the United Nations and the Times Education Supplement. So I would advise, if you want to find a lot of our content, I would take a peek at that Pinterest board. Now, the next slide, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but these are some of the organizations that support us. And if you look closely, you'll see we've gone international in the last year. We've got 2 Chinese partners, the Metin Group and SKT Platform. We've got Cutter Foundation International, and I know we've got Global Ed folks in the room. You'll notice that VIF International Education, and I believe they sponsor this event as well. So these are some of the organizations that support us when I showed that framework of the 3 sort of legged stool of what is P21. Now, I've mentioned that we have 20 states who are our partners, but one of the things I want to focus on for you folks is the slide doesn't render itself very well, but there's tiny little red dots, and those are our exemplar schools, and I'll talk more about that in a moment because we're kicking that program up a lot. So an exemplar school program, if you visit p21.org, we are now accepting applications, and we look for the best schools in the United States, the best after-school programs, and the best preschool programs that focus on 21st century teaching and learning. And with your help, if we get applications, I know we've got some friends from Canada online, and we've got some from Mexico and Europe. If we start getting applications from outside the United States for exemplar schools, that's going to allow me to go back to my board in a few weeks and say, hey, this exemplar school program in which we identify the best practitioners in 21st century teaching and learning needs to be an international program. So help me out, folks. So again, go to p21.org, look for the link that says exemplar school. The applications are open now. What I'm going to switch now to is sort of the reason P21 is interested in global education. Again, we sit at the nexus of practice, policy, and business, and we hear this from all three segments. So the first slide you're seeing is an element, and off the right is the QR code and the tiny URL for where you can find this resource. But this is a white paper that came out of OECD, and I want to say 2010. And the title of the white paper was How Technology Changes Demand for Human Skills. And if you look at the list of things that you put in the chat box a few minutes ago, is look at what is at the top of there. Some of you put critical thinking, some of you put communication, some of you put problem solving, this concept of expert thinking. So OECD 6-year-old report was identifying some of the same very skills that you did. Now let's look at this next slide. This next slide comes from Pearson, which used to be the largest publisher of textbooks on earth, but has moved completely away from textbooks and now wants to focus on online learning and really is digging into higher ed because their concern is that colleges aren't producing kids with the skills, graduates with the skills who will be successful. The first piece of data is this core skills competency gap. That comes from a report called The Human Factor. There was an organization called, what are they called? Burning Glass Technologies that focused on a skills gap. The data for the second piece, and I'm going to reference it in more detail in a few slides, is also about the skills gap too. The tiny URLs and QR codes on the right are the links. This other piece is from the Manpower Group, and it's from their 2015-2016 study on what is the skills gap in the workplace. And you'll see there's a reference in there to soft skills, and frankly, I detest the term soft skills. These are not soft skills if they're essential to college, career, and life success, but some of the language in some of the papers mentions them as soft skills. So we have to live with that language in some of the papers, but hopefully that's not going to stick. And so what does P21 care about? Again, we focus on college, career, and life skills. And this idea that school's only purpose is not to produce workers. It's one of the purposes of schools is to produce people who have the skills to be successful in college, career, and life. And frankly, from a personal perspective, I would add that they have to have civic skills because they have to be successful as a citizen. On our next slide, this is a reference to a piece that was in The Economist, and it's about driving the skills agenda. I'm going to show you the next slide because the pull-out piece is really focused on skills. This is a shot from it. It was a white paper, and let's look at the list of skills that the Economist calls out. And if you go back to the list we generated in the second slide, it's almost identical. Problem solving, teamwork and communication, critical thinking and creativity. And if you look at our work, which we're going to explore in a moment, you'll see at the core of the P21 work is this idea of the 4 C's, and we're going to explore that in a second. And this was the slide from Pearson that I referenced. This is brand new. This is from the Manpower Group. This is their 2016-2017 Talent Shortage Survey. It just came out last week. And what they've done is they've got a PDF that's very long if you want to read it. But this year they decided to put it in the form of an infographic. And the links, the URL, and the QR code will take you to this particular thing. And if you look at it, there's 4 or 5 essential graphics on there. But one of the key pieces of evidence is that employers are saying the skill shortage now is the worst it's been since the last economic crash. So we've got a golden opportunity at the moment. Now this next one, this is a fascinating one, and this doesn't appear in every framework. I saw somebody put multilingual on our slide 2 discussion board, and that was an interesting thing. So this piece from The Atlantic, what I like about this is it's focused on the lack of language skills. So when you sort of dig into the data on the lack of language skills in this Atlantic piece, is there's some fascinating information about the number of college students who are studying a second language in the United States, and there's been a dramatic drop. I want to say something in the order of 100,000 fewer students are taking a second language since in the last 20 years. So there's been a drop of 100,000 in the last 20 years. And another significant piece of data is that only 7% of American college students are enrolled in a language course, a second language course. There's another fascinating piece, and this actually relates to me as a student, is that when you look at the language, this article explores the languages that are under study. Believe it or not, French still is the most popular language for American college students. I studied French in high school. I had a French minor in college. I worked for the French department. I learned to read it and write it. I did not learn to speak it. And as a resident of a state, California, in which almost 50% of the people speak Spanish, French does not do me a lot of good on a daily basis. And so this article is encouraging us to take additional languages, to focus on Arabic, to focus on some of the African languages, to focus on Bengali, because there are like twice as many people who speak Bengali as there are people who speak French. So again, this feature of a skill set is not just focused on these things we mentioned earlier, like our one correspondent who said multilingualism. That's a key feature of this work. And this is near and dear to my heart. As all of you know, the United States had a very contested election that was decided about a week ago. And one of the common threads to the analysis of this, the election was that the lack of civic discourse, or the quality of civic discourse, is so disintegrated in the United States and perhaps in other countries that one of the key features of global education has to be the creation of civic-minded individuals, 21st century citizens. And so we produced a piece a few years ago. We're reviving it, called Reimagining Citizenship for the 21st Century. And number one, significant, increasingly complex challenges. If you look at the challenges that face the United States or the rest of the world, if you use the UN Sustainability Goals as a metric for that, we have incredibly complex challenges. We need people who are civic citizens. Pollution in one country drifts across national borders. Immigration or warfare causes migration or refugee populations. We live in a globally interconnected world. people need to be 21st century citizens of the world. So I would say, if you get a chance, download this doc. Everything the P21 produces is free, and take a peek at it as well. And what are the characteristics of 21st century citizens? They're informed, they're engaged, and they're active. And that's one of the complaints I have about some frameworks, including my own, P21's, is that we don't focus enough on the action piece. They have to be literate in civics. And we wrote this long before the election, that the importance of that particular skill is profound. And I want to clear up something at the beginning, because a lot of people who attack global ed or global competence, global awareness, or the 4 C's always complain that we're throwing away core academic subjects. Nothing could be farther from the truth. We believe that these skills are taught within the context of core academic subjects. You must collaborate about something, and that something is science or math or English or literature or history, which I taught. You must critically think about something significant, again, the core subjects. So please don't let anybody tell you, and we certainly wouldn't, that a focus on 21st century skills and global education wants to do away with core academic knowledge. Nothing could be farther from the truth. This entire presentation is focused on global competencies. We're going to look at more of that in a minute. And then this idea that we have to be capable of participating safely, intelligently, and productively in a digital world. This presentation is not about digital literacy, but I see a lot of the strands that people have to be digitally aware. I'm a father of a 15-year-old boy and a 17-year-old boy, and I don't think I'm doing my job as a parent, as a citizen, if I don't equip my sons with digital literacy so that they can safely participate in the digital world that is so important to them. Now this framework, some of you may have seen it before. It's an iconic image from our work. It was created out of a collaboration between practitioners, policymakers in Washington, D.C. and the States, the business community, nonprofits, and academics. We're going to break this apart, but this is sort of the foundation for all the work that I'm going to talk about as we move forward. The framework has different sections. You'll notice that there are core subjects. Again, skills are taught within and about core subjects, significant content. You'll notice another section of the rainbow, we call it the rainbow because that's what it is, has 21st century themes. In this presentation and for this conference, we're focusing on global awareness. Now, a different section of the rainbow focuses on these disaggregated skills. And you'll notice the ones on the left: critical thinking and problem solving, communication, collaboration, and creativity. In the United States, those are shortened and called the 4 C's. There are folks who want to add C's to them, like community or whatever. That's fine. But this is the core 4 of what P21 is about. We also advocate information, media, and digital literacy folks. And then the other part, you'll notice there are some of the things that appeared on your feedback in slide 2, this idea of attitudes and mindsets. And you'll notice the first one under life and career is flexibility and adaptability, initiative, and self-direction. These are attitudes, they're propensities, they're mindsets. We think they're an integral part of this work as well. Now, I've blizzarded you with a whole bunch of skills and ideas, and I want to go back to our benchmark list. So now if you can go back into the chat section, let's repopulate our list. See if there's anything that this presentation so far has brought to mind, and let's make a new list. What are the essential skills that your children, students, whatever the age may be, if you're in higher ed, in K-12, preschool, whatever, what are the essential skills for work, life, and learning that kids need today? And I'll scan the list as you put in ideas. Molly, straight out of the box with imagination, my favorite. Entrepreneurship. Okay, I'm going to riff on entrepreneurship for a second because it's near and dear to my heart. P21 in part hired me because I've worked in 12 different countries, traveled to, last count, 44. I'm still working with the Korean government. and I've been working with the Korea Development Institute for 2 years now. For a while, I was going to Seoul every 6 weeks, and I did a presentation similar to this on 21st century skills, and the Korean leadership listened to me and they said, yes, Dave, the 4 C's are important, but what about entrepreneurship? And I riffed some more about mindsets and things, and they said, yes, Dave, mindsets are important, but what about entrepreneurship? There, in the developed world and certainly the developing world, there's a significant interest in entrepreneurship as a life skill. Synthesis, I love that. You know, there's been some work done around this as well on the idea that Bloom's taxonomy, the new Bloom's taxonomy has creativity as its most complex intellectual skill. And then I want to thank Tamara because she has something in there about asking the right questions. You're going to see a lot of presentations. I've seen some in the last few years where people are beginning the conversation is with what problem do you want to solve? I see a lot of work in education around the Sustainable Development Goals with young people who say, which of these goals do we need to work on that are most important to our community, our citizens, our nation, whatever. Fabulous list, even better than the first round. I'm going to advance to the next slide because I want to give us some time for Q&A. I want to show you a few documents. Again, P21 produces these documents. They are all free. I apologize that this framework was written for the U.S. education system. And the reason I apologize is because it's an opportunity that P21 needs to revise it to make it a global education document. So if you explore or download this document, you can use the URL there or the QR code, or just go to the Pinterest board that I showed earlier and download it. What you're going to see is this is state action, and this is for leaders, and they could be leaders of school districts, provincial leaders, it could be national government leaders, education systems. But what do they do from a practical perspective to make global education a reality in their system? The focus is on practice that comes from policy. The next piece is really kind of breaking down that prior document I showed. What are these essential elements of a framework, an action framework for leaders? There has to be standards. This work has to be anchored in standards. P21, I'll show you the documents for our global competency standards. We're not the only ones. We did not invent global competency. We have a model, but there are other folks like Asia Society that have a model. OECD advocates a model. There's lots of organizations that have a model, but the key takeaway is this work has to be anchored in standards about competency. What can a learner know, do, show, believe, act to demonstrate their competence? The second piece is scalable teacher supports. The work I'm doing in Korea, I know we have folks online from Mexico. I've worked in Mexico, Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, and the idea was not to train every teacher or every student in the country all at once. The idea, excuse me, was to create a pilot system that was scalable. So we're advocating, and others would as well, that they're effective and scalable teacher supports. We have as an integral feature of our model, it's not in every model, but I think it's in most models, is this idea of how we handle language instruction. I'm a big advocate of a dual language immersion. My children, my sons, did not go to dual immersion schools, but they grew up in a multilingual home. My wife's first language is Tagalog. They have been in Spanish class since they were in 2nd grade. I didn't think that was enough, so when my oldest son turned 16, I sent him to the summer for Costa Rica to do volunteer work in service projects in Costa Rica. But this idea of language instruction as an essential element is crucial. We need whole school models. It's not enough that that one teacher, and some of you may be that teacher, who's down the end of the hallway, who's doing spectacular work about global ed. We have to create a context, a community of practice, so that everybody is supported and we have whole school models. We also need a recognition system, and that's why I was talking about our exemplar school program, is we need, and it's folks like P21 or Asia Society or the national governments have to recognize these exemplary practices. And then the city I work in, Washington, D.C., number 6, this idea of global experiences. It's profoundly expensive to fly every student in the world to another place so that they have a global experience, but they can have virtual global experiences. There are dozens of organizations, Youth for Understanding, Level Up Village, World Savvy, VIF. My gosh, there's free platforms like Edmodo, ePals, Google Classroom, in which people can have a global experience. You don't physically need to go out of your classroom to have a global experience. Sure, that's ideal, but students need a global experience. Next one, I just want to talk a little bit very briefly before we get into Q&A about what some states in the United States are doing. The most successful states so far have been North Carolina, that's what NC is, and Wisconsin, that's a Midwestern state. This is some of the things they're doing, but they have standards. North Carolina linked their global competence standards to their social studies standards. They've created a badging system, more on that in a moment, and they are creating a system, a network of global education exemplars. I love what Wisconsin has done. They're allowing high school students to graduate with this extra add-on to their diploma in an achievement certificate for global scholars. It's a fabulous program. In my state, California, is started a World Languages Project, and we had our first Global Ed Summit, and I'm really excited about it, and I'm hoping in 2017, California, my homeland, does a better job in global ed. One other document, I'm not going to speak at length about this, but this is K-12 Global Competencies Grade Level Indicators. That's a mouthful. But what this document really looks at is, at the first grade level, what skills does a first grader display to indicate global competence, or second or third or so on. Free download, take a peek at it. And finally, the next one is global ready teachers. So I've had this discussion many, many times. How do teachers who are not global ready create global ready students? So we have to approach it from a systems perspective. We have to create systems, standards, exemplar schools that enable global competence. We have to have standards for students, benchmarks, and we have to have benchmarks and standards for teachers. Brief pause on this one. I'm going to need help on phase 2 of this. This is phase 1. P21 has never done professional development, and I think that's our shortcoming, because we support practitioners, but we don't support them with ways to improve their practice. So we've done this for the first time in partnership with an organization called Participate Learning, which also works with VIF Education. They have an online learning platform, and this is top secret. It doesn't go public until tomorrow, but for the first time ever, P21 is offering badges in the 4 C's. They're not free. We're a nonprofit, but I have to pay salaries and keep the lights on, so we have to charge for these, but not much. But these are self-directed, self-guided badges in the 4 C's from P21, and because I'm a project-based learning guide, they're structured as project. But what I want help on and advice on, and you have my contact information, is how do we create badges in classes and modules for students and teachers so that they get credit for their skills and knowledge. So help me with that one, folks. And then a couple closing slides, and then we'll do a little bit of Q&A until you folks get too tired, is what's the role of a global ready teacher? Well, it prepares students for successful citizenship and competitiveness in an increasingly interconnected world. And again, because of the very contentious U.S. election last week, I have concerns, personal and professional, about this interconnected world, and I think this is the duty of global educators, that we have to strengthen the connections. This is a troubling time, and we have to work extra hard to make that happen. Global ready students, they develop the attitudes, skills, and knowledge to understand and participate in a globally connected world. Again, we have to help them. We have to help put them in a context where they can develop the attitude, skills, and knowledge, because it's their world. We've dumbed it up of late, we being the adults. We have to equip them and get them on the right track. So what I'm going to do now is just share a couple of things. There's our URL, there's our hashtags, there's our Facebook page. I already showed you the Pinterest page. Those are the resources. P21 is a nonprofit. Everything we write, we give away for free. You can find it on our website, p21.org. You can find it on the Pinterest board. And if you have a resource that you think belongs in the Pinterest board, send me an email or direct message me through Twitter at David PBL Ross. And I want to make that a global repository for content about 21st century skills, teaching, learning, even if it's not in English. I would love to have stuff in Spanish and French and Arabic and Turkish, whatever language you folks speak. Send me those resources. I would love to put them and share them with the world. And so without further ado, Steve, I'm going to turn it back to you and we can do a Q&A.
Okay, I think Lucy's going to take us home here.
Okay.
But I'll start us off. If you have a question for David, and thank you, David, that was informative and interesting. If you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat.
I just was going to say that I'm really glad to see that, I don't know, the last year or two that P21 has evolved a little bit in terms of the framework and the teacher guide that you have that that VIF helped put together. I think, I think back to the beginning of my ed tech, time, maybe 10 years ago, and P21 with your graphic was so pivotal in everything that I did back then. And so it's exciting to see these new aspects of P21, continue to grow and that sort of thing. And if people haven't, and this is not a paid advertisement, but if people have not looked at the state framework and the teacher guide, I think they're both applicable to districts in terms of your planning for global programming. And maybe that's one conversation that we have. We have 20 minutes here, so we can go any direction that you want to go. But I think in terms of, my suggestion for P21 would be to not just do the PD piece, but have a consulting group that's able to go and advise school districts of what they need to do. And an example I will give you is my daughter's high school. They have a new principal. He's in his second year. He's been at the school for a while as a teacher, an assistant principal. They last year they started a committee on trying to globalize the school more or call more attention to their global programming. And one of the things I would have told them to do was, map out what you're doing and then look at some sort of framework and see where it fits in and what you can articulate already, as opposed to reinventing the wheel and mandating and that sort of thing. And the other thing that I noticed with this too, maybe David, you want to talk about this, is that some schools also think that going global is just exchange programs. And it's so much more than that. And that was another thing I noticed too. The school had a lot of exchange programs and travel programs, but there's so much more to it. Like you said, not every kid's going to be able to go abroad. So I know that's a lot to digest, but I'd love to know your thoughts on any of that.
Well, there was a lot, but thanks, Lucy. You've actually prompted me, because one of the things I want to bring to P21 next year is actually district support teams. And the first conversation has been around what P21 has always done, which is focus on policy. And yes, that's integral to our organization. And yes, I want to develop a policy team that supports district. You have just given me a whole new business line with this idea of a consulting team that works with districts around global ed. Fabulous idea, and yes, now I want to do it. So there was that piece. The framework piece, I agree that the framework could be taken down to the district level, and I honestly think that even as a school, it could be taken down. And I want to echo what you said about, let's not just have global ed reside in exchange programs, whether they be face-to-face or virtual. I was in a school last week that was applying to be one of our exemplars. And the reason their status is in jeopardy is because the only thing they did in terms of global education was one 8th grade English language arts teacher did a virtual pen pal program. And that's so far from what I think is a baseline of global education. That is a starting place, but just one teacher in one room doing a exchange program with pen pals is not enough. It did not change her instruction. It did not change the lens at which she approached the literature that her class read. It did not change the source documents that students would read when approaching history. So frankly, I don't see a school being a global exemplar if that's the way they're going to approach global education. It has to infuse the work, the teaching and learning.
There's some sort of continuum out there that would help a school assess them, do a self-assessment as to where they are. I think this has parallels to ed tech adoption too, because there are a lot of teachers out there who are using technology really superficially and haven't gotten to the point just in their development as a teacher of really tackling deeper learning. And it's not a pointing fingers kind of thing. It's just something that you come to as you become more self-actualized as a teacher, I think. So I wonder if there's a continuum, and also, what is an exemplary global school to you personally? I'd be really curious about that. And then we have some questions in the chat too that I want to make sure we get.
Well, my first reaction to this idea of a continuum, there may be one, but I'm not aware of it. So if anybody knows to share one, I'd love to see it. But as you were speaking, I was thinking about the technology adoption models. Everybody is in love with SAMR models, but there are a variety of technology adoption models that have a continuum of practice and implementation and embedding and all of that. If there is one in global, I'd love to see it and use it and share it. If there's not one, I think we need to develop it. And in terms of an ideal global school, I have not seen one. I've seen tremendous schools, and that's because it's not because they don't exist. I know they exist, and there's several of them in several states. I just physically have not attended one. I've seen, most of what I've seen is a focus on multiculturalism at some very good schools, but it's an inward-facing multiculturalism. And I've seen lots of virtual exchanges in schools, but it's not extended into the curriculum. It doesn't become a lens through which the curriculum is focused. So I personally haven't seen one, so I can't give you an ideal, but I hope to visit some next year.
Just as a plug for tomorrow's keynotes, we have one keynote by Chip Kimball, who is the superintendent of Singapore American School. He came from Lake Washington, schools, I think, in Washington, to Singapore American School, I don't know, 3, 4, or 5 years ago. And at the time, he took his faculty on a couple of trips, or his innovation team, to look at kind of the best schools in the U.S. and in the international school world. And they came to Chicago, and I've also heard him speak at the Costa Conference, kind of comparing American systems to Singaporean to international schools. It was really, really interesting. Anyway, he's written a book with a colleague at Singapore American School, and they're kind of in the stage of implementing the best practices that they gleaned from these trips. And so he's keynoting tomorrow afternoon, I believe, and so I'm excited to hear their update, because it may be one of those schools that I think they may be, they're global just in their existence because they're in an international school, but I think I don't know, it will be really interesting. So make sure you come for that.
Lucy, I want to interject for a second. I actually worked at his school. I highly endorse listening to him. He's a brilliant man. He's very progressive. His staff is one of the most highly trained staffs I've ever seen, and they have done exactly what Lucy's described. I've hosted some of them when they've come to the United States, and they more intently studied school models than any group I've ever seen before, and their campus is focused on, I mean, it's a multicultural campus. They have students from all over the world in a beautiful setting, but the work he and his staff have done on curriculum instruction, if you've ignored anything else, is spectacular. So yes, tune in for him.
And then I know that we had some questions in here. Do they have recognition? What was that? I'm not sure what that meant. Does anybody want to, I'm going to turn on the microphones for everyone, and if you want to talk, just hit the little hand icon and we'll call on people. If you want to grab the mic and say something, we'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, I'm scanning through here to see if there are any deep questions. Here's one from Tracy, and I don't know if you covered this one or not. How does global education differ from, oh, this is a really good question, from technology integration in education? And I'll say one thing about it and then turn it over to you, David. I think that using technology in schools, I mean, there's a plethora of technology in a lot of U.S. schools now because of Common Core testing. You know, a lot of devices have been bought, right? Not everywhere, but there's more, right? And I don't think we're using the technology for any other, you know, kind of purpose other than the testing in a lot of cases, or really thinking about it at least. And so I look at global as being a bucket that you could tie yourself to in terms of why you're using the technology. We're buying these devices because we want to connect our students to the world, and we want to create for public audiences, and we want to do this and that. That's how I see global as a lens for making that technology purchase worthwhile. What do you think, David?
I would say the exact same thing. I've visited so many schools in the last 3 months, and the schools are viewing technology as an end in of itself. And my question to them is always, to what purpose are you using the technology? And if it's just to teach kids PowerPoint or Microsoft Word or whatever, that's a very short-sighted view of technology. Technology has to be used in service to something. And this idea of global as a lens so that technology has an add-on value is exactly what I would have said.
And then Nady is saying, I want to ask David that the global education with its intercultural dimension imposes new kinds of measures and filters to separate the wheat and the chaff. How to deal with that, especially as we move from the age of information to the age of attention? That's a deep question.
Well, you know, one thing I didn't get into, but it's going to be paramount, on April 3rd in Chicago at the next COSIN conference, Lucy and Steve know of this, is there will be a partnership between COSIN, UNESCO, and maybe OECD, in which they're going to talk about global competencies, in particular PISA 2018, in which there will be a pilot test for global competency using the OECD framework. So I'm very curious to see how the United States performs on that particular exam. And frankly, I have no evidence to support this opinion other than experience in 50 states. I don't think the U.S. is going to do too well. And I'm curious to see if that's an impetus to policymakers to say, hey, we need to change instruction and cast a global lens on how we teach and learn. Otherwise, it's not going to look good.
Well, that might happen given the political climate that's going on. That's my first reaction to that one. Liza, who just joined from the Philippines, I believe. I just helped her in the chat room on the front page, and I'm so excited she got in here. And she's asking about VIF. And Liza, VIF is one of P21's members, and they're a sponsor of the conference. And yes, we've got lots of people in here who have experience with VIF. So VIF was instrumental in some of the documents that P21 has created. And does anybody want to take the mic and talk about VIF for a second or two? David Ross or David Potter, you could talk. May not be here anymore. He was here earlier. There he is. David Potter, say something great about VIF.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Absolutely.
All right. Hi, this is Dave from VIF. Thanks for the question there. Right now, VIF has a network of global schools. There's about 100 of them, mostly in North Carolina, but in 7 other states. And these schools have adopted the whole school model of global, which means that all instruction, all professional development, all the look and feel of the entire school is all global themed, plus all the schools are connecting with schools around the world. And this model, which is kind of recognized by the state of North Carolina as the Global Ready Schools model, and just last week the state recognized 4, I believe, of the schools for being the first 4 Global Ready schools in the state, and North Carolina is really the first Global Ready state. So Carolina Forest and Harris Road, and there's some others you can find on the North Carolina DPI site, which I think someone else linked to in the chat box, and you can read, or if you do a Google search for Global Ready Schools in North Carolina. And really North Carolina has gotten out there in front, working with P21 to be a state that recognizes these schools and educators for these global competencies. And it really is the model for other states to replicate. And that statewide guide, the P21, is very, very valuable. And I think now that ESSA has devolved the responsibility more from the federal level to the state level, this is an ideal time for states to go global. And I think Dave and his teams will go state to state and be able to work on to do that. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, David Pryor. I also want to introduce David Ross to another person that's worked really closely with us over the course of this year, and I spent a lot of time hanging out with her at the Global Education Forum. That's Lisa Petro. So Lisa, if you've got your mic handy, I'm going to give you a second. She's been working with schools in Mexico, and she mentions in the chat that Prepa Tech del Monterrey in Mexico has a model that uses digital cross-cultural exchange as a lens for cultural competence-based curriculum. So Lisa, do you want to tell us about that for a minute or so? We'll give her a second.
Sorry about that.
Go
Can everybody hear me all right? Right. Thank you. I'd be happy to. Yeah, I was just listening in on this really great presentation, touching on so many points of reference that educators and schools really need to be aware of, coming from that whole model approach, making sure that every stakeholder is being addressed. And so yes, I'm currently working with a school in Mexico, Prepa Tech de Monterrey, and we've designed a model for this national institution. There's about 30 campuses that are using the model right now. And in that, we ascertain that there are very core experiences that students can have that enable them to really focus in on the different aspects of being culturally competent. So things like social and emotional learning, communication, of course, dual immersion, I think, is also very important. And engagement is a huge part of that as well, amongst skills and knowledge. And so we use digital exchange as this kind of conduit. Teachers are asked to intentionalize that experience by focusing
Did we lose Lisa?
Yeah, this is Dave. I couldn't hear anything.
I was talking for a minute, and then I don't know where she went. Anyway, hopefully she'll come back, but if not, why don't you take us home, David, and leave us with a few final thoughts about either where you're going with your vision or what we can do to support your vision or what your dream is, anything like that. We would love to hear you wrap things up for us.
Absolutely. I didn't take note of who said this, but I think there is a golden opportunity at the moment, at least in the United States, to do this type of work. As some of you may know, there's a new federal law called the Every Student Succeeds Act. And I don't think there's been a piece of legislation in the last 16 years that's been more friendly to project-based learning and to socio-emotional learning and to global education as this piece. But somebody has opened the door from a policy perspective, and it's now up to folks like us to walk through that door and to take advantage of the opening. So I would encourage you to participate in organizations like this and conferences like this, because I have the fear that we'll think we're working alone or in a vacuum, but as you can tell from this conference, is that there are an extraordinary number of people around the globe who believe the same thing. But each of us has to take advantage of what the world presents us and what our country presents us. So in the U.S., we have ESSA. I think PISA 2018 is an extraordinary opportunity to push this work forward as well. I think some of the data that's coming out of the business community in regards to workforce skill needs, skills gaps, skills shortages is an extraordinary opportunity. I think the problems of higher education provide an opportunity to redo what it means to be highly educated, whether that's badges or micro-credentials. So this moment of flux and chaos is a moment of opportunity, and we need folks like Lucy and Steve in this conference, and we need folks like P21 to organize the groundswell of interest and to take advantage of the opportunity. So I want to thank all of you folks for joining in, whether it was early in the morning or late at night, and please, I have an open door policy as well to communications. I'm meeting with high school students tomorrow because they emailed me and wanted to chat. So please, if you have ideas, suggestions, resources that you want us to get out there or work that you want us to do, please reach out and chat.
Okay, so tomorrow, thank you, David. I'm so excited to have you involved and that you had the opportunity to, you had the time to make for us tonight. So I think this is the perfect end cap to a great day. Tomorrow, I'm trying to think who our keynotes are. I know one of them in the morning is somebody from London, Dimitri, I think it is from change.org. We have, I'm not looking at my list right now, we have a principal from a Catholic school in Los Angeles who's done a lot to align her school to global goodness. There's 4 or 5 of them. There's 4, I think, every day. So please come for at least the keynotes, if not the general sessions. And we will also have these recorded so that you can access them later and reference them as often as you want to. So thanks again, everyone, for coming. There are 2 more sessions following this. And, one more plug. We have a game that we've developed with Chrome Warrior that allows you to do certain kinds of digital activities related to the conference. And if you get a certain amount of points, you get your attendance certificate and that sort of thing. So if you want to see what this platform looks like for gamification of PD, of professional development, please take a look at it. It's linked on our front page. It's in the daily bulletin that Steve sends out, and we'd love for you to try it out and give us your feedback. Thanks again, everyone. I'm going to stop recording right now.